January 20th, 1993. Los Angeles. Gregory Peck was reading Harper Lee's latest letter when the telephone rang at 7 in the morning. Not the gentle chime of a normal call. The kind that arrives too early and stops your heart before you even answer. He set down the letter, her handwriting still strong and clear after all these years, and lifted the receiver. The voice on the other end belonged to a mutual friend, someone who had worked with both of them at UNICEF. And she spoke 3 words that made the room tilt. Audrey is gone. Gregory's hand found the edge of his desk, mahogany solid under his palm. The only thing that felt real. 63 years old, cancer. She had kept it private until the very end, working with children in Somalia even as the disease spread. Because that was Audrey, always thinking of others before herself. Wait, because what happened in the next 3 weeks would reveal something about Gregory Peck that even his closest friends hadn't fully understood. A grief so profound that he couldn't speak her name without his voice breaking. A love that had lasted 40 years, not romantic but deeper than romance. The kind of bond that forms when 2 people recognize something essential in each other. And when he finally decided to honor her memory, what he recorded in a small studio would reach millions of people and make them understand that some friendships transcend Hollywood, transcend fame, transcend even death itself. He hung up the phone and sat very still. His wife Veronique found him 20 minutes later in the same position, staring at nothing. She touched his shoulder gently, and he looked up at her with eyes that seemed suddenly older, more fragile. "She was the best of us," he said quietly. "The best thing Hollywood ever produced." Veronique had met Audrey many times over the years at industry events and charity galas, had seen how her face lit up whenever she spotted Gregory across a crowded room, how they would find each other and talk for hours while everyone else networked and schmoozed. She understood that this wasn't just the loss of a colleague. This was something that would leave a permanent mark. Have you ever lost someone who made you believe in goodness? Someone whose mere existence reassured you that decency still mattered in a world that often seemed to reward its opposite? In the days that followed, Gregory couldn't watch television. Every channel carried tributes to Audrey, clips from her films, interviews from her UNICEF work. He saw her face everywhere, that luminous smile, those eyes that could convey such warmth and vulnerability at the same time. But he couldn't watch. Every image pulled him back to Rome, summer of 1952, when they had made Roman holiday together on location throughout that ancient city. She had been 23 years old, virtually unknown except for small roles in British films, terrified of failing, and so determined to prove herself worthy of the role that director William Wyler had taken a chance on her. He remembered how she would arrive on set 2 hours before the 7 in the morning call time, already in costume, already prepared, how she practiced her lines while the crew set up cameras and lights along the Via Veneto and near the Spanish Steps. How she asked him questions about acting technique and camera angles, and how to find truth in a character. And she never once made it seem like she doubted herself. Only that she wanted to learn, to be better, to honor the work they were creating together. Gregory had been 36 then, already an established star with films like The Yearling and Gentleman's Agreement behind him. And he could have treated her like the novice she was, could have demanded the spotlight, could have let the studio keep her name small on the posters. But he saw something in her from the very first rehearsal, a quality that couldn't be taught, a luminosity that the camera loved, an intelligence and grace that reminded him why he had fallen in love with acting in the first place. He had insisted she receive equal billing on that film, over the studio's objections, because he knew from the first week of shooting that she would win the Academy Award and he would not. And he had been right, and he had never for one moment regretted giving her that recognition. That nervous young woman had become his trusted friend for 4 decades. And now she was gone, and the world felt diminished for it. The funeral was held in Switzerland on January 24th, in the small village of Talashinas where Audrey had spent her final peaceful years among the mountains and vineyards. Gregory sent white roses, knowing they had been her favorite, but he did not attend. He was 81 years old and the journey seemed impossible, not because of the distance, but because he could not imagine standing in that small church making polite conversation with people who had known her face from magazines, but perhaps not known her heart the way he had. Instead, he stayed home with his memories and his grief, and he thought about what he might say if he could speak to her one last time. What words might capture 40 years of friendship, of mutual respect, of a bond that had outlasted marriages and careers, and the relentless machinery of Hollywood itself. When have you wished you could say goodbye to someone you loved? When have you realized too late that you never properly told them what they meant to you? A week after the funeral, a friend visited and mentioned something that stopped Gregory mid-sentence. Audrey had loved poetry deeply, particularly the work of Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian poet and Nobel laureate who had written about love and spirituality and the eternal nature of the soul. There was one poem she had returned to throughout her life, a piece called Unending Love that spoke to something essential in her spirit. Gregory asked to see it. The friend brought him a copy the next day. And when Gregory read the opening lines about loving someone in numberless forms and numberless times and life after life and age after age forever, he understood immediately why Audrey had cherished these words. It spoke of a love that transcended the physical world, that existed beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. And he realized that what he felt for Audrey was exactly that kind of love. Not romantic, but eternal. Not possessive, but pure recognition of something luminous in her that mirrored something in himself. A shared understanding of what it meant to use fame not for vanity, but for purpose, not for self, but for service to others. She had spent the last years of her life traveling to the poorest countries on earth as a UNICEF Goodwill ambassador, a role she had taken in 1988 after decades away from the screen. She went to Ethiopia during the famine, to Bangladesh after devastating floods, to Somalia where children were dying by the thousands from starvation and disease. She held them in her arms, these skeletal children with bloated bellies and hollow eyes, and she spoke to them gently even when they couldn't understand her words, because she understood that sometimes presence itself is medicine, that being seen and acknowledged can kindle hope even in the darkest circumstances. She brought attention to their suffering, using her celebrity as a tool to save lives, appearing on television programs not to promote films but to beg the world to help these forgotten children. And he had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963, had stood on that stage at the March on Washington, had defended blacklisted writers when it cost him roles and friendships, had chosen principle over profit again and again, because both he and Audrey understood that with great privilege came great responsibility, that fame was not just a gift but an obligation to use that platform for good. How many people truly live according to their values? How many are willing to sacrifice comfort and safety to do what's right? He decided then that he would record a tribute to her, that he would read this poem and speak about the woman she truly had been, and that he would do it not in some grand public forum with cameras and recorders, but in the quiet intimacy of a recording studio, just his voice and the words and a memory of everything she had meant to him and to the world. The recording took place in Los Angeles in mid-February, in a small studio on Sunset Boulevard that Gregory had used before for audiobook narrations. He arrived alone on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a single sheet of paper on which he had copied out the poem in his own careful handwriting. The engineer, a young man who had grown up watching Gregory's films, offered to prepare some remarks about Audrey's career, perhaps some clips from her movies. But Gregory shook his head gently. No, he said, I need to speak from the heart or not at all. The engineer understood and simply set up the microphone, adjusted the levels, and stepped back. Gregory sat in the recording booth, the paper trembling slightly in his hands, and began. He talked about Roman holiday first, about those 6 months in Rome when everything had seemed possible, when Audrey had been a princess on screen and a queen in life, gracious and kind, and utterly without pretension. His voice, the deep familiar baritone that had narrated a generation's understanding of moral authority, that had spoken Atticus Finch's words about walking in someone else's shoes, began to waver as he described her later work with UNICEF, How she had traveled to Ethiopia and Somalia and Sudan, places where cameras rarely went, where suffering was immense and help was desperately needed. How she had helped children who were dying from starvation, and somehow given them hope just by being present, by caring, by refusing to look away from their pain. She didn't do it for publicity. Gregory said, his voice breaking slightly on the last word. She did it because she genuinely believed she could make a difference. Because she had survived hunger herself as a child during the Nazi occupation of Holland in World War II, living on tulip bulbs and what little food the Dutch resistance could smuggle to her family. And she remembered what it felt like to be forgotten by the world, to be a child whose suffering no one acknowledged. She never forgot that fear, that helplessness. And when she had the power to help other children experiencing that same terror, she didn't hesitate. He paused, gathering himself, and the engineer could hear him taking slow, deep breaths through the microphone. And then he read the poem. I seem to have loved you in numberless forms, numberless times, in life after life, and age after age, forever. The words came slowly, carefully, each syllable weighted with grief and love, and the terrible finality of knowing he would never see her again, never hear her laugh, never receive one of her thoughtful letters in which she always asked about his family before mentioning her own accomplishments. My spellbound heart has made and remade the necklace of songs that you take as a gift, wear around your neck in your many forms, in life after life, and age after age, forever. His voice grew quieter, low, fragile, as he continued. Whenever I hear old chronicles of love, its age-old pain, its ancient tale of being apart or together. When he reached the final lines, when he spoke the words about old love and shakes that renew and renew forever, his voice broke completely. And he had to stop. The engineer, watching through the glass, saw Gregory's shoulders shake, saw him wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. There was a long silence. Then Gregory leaned forward to the microphone and said very quietly, "That's all. That's what I wanted to say." The recording was released 2 weeks later, and within days it had reached millions of people across America and around the world. They listened in their cars and in their homes, and they wept. Not just because Gregory Peck was crying, but because he was saying what they all felt, that Audrey Hepburn had been more than an actress, more than a star. That she had represented something pure in a world that so often felt corrupt, something gentle in a culture that celebrated hardness, something irreplaceable that was now gone forever. Do you remember when movie stars stood for something beyond fame? When they used their platforms not just to sell products, but to make the world better? Letters arrived at Gregory's home by the hundreds and thousands. People thanking him for putting into words what they could not express, for honoring Audrey in a way that felt true and real and completely absent of Hollywood's usual empty gestures. You read every letter. He answered none. There was nothing more to say. He had loved her in the only way he knew how, quietly and completely, and without expectation of return. And now the love would live on, and that record him in those words and the sound of an old man's voice breaking, as he tried to explain the unexplainable. That some people touch your life in ways that changed everything. That friendship can be as profound as any romance, that when you lose someone who made you better just by existing, the world is never quite the same again. This is what Hollywood used to mean. Not just fame and fortune, but character and principle. Not just beauty on screen, but beauty in action. If you remember when actors were more than celebrities, when there were role models who stood for something larger than themselves, and you understand what we lost when Audrey left us. And you understand why Gregory Peck, at 81 years old, sat in that studio and wept for a friendship that had lasted 40 years and would last forever. Remember, shared a story with someone who remembers when dignity mattered, when kindness wasn't weakness, when the best of Hollywood gave us hope that goodness could survive in a difficult world. Because these stories matter. Because remembering matters. Because Audrey and Gregory showed us that true friendship transcends everything.
You and I have floated here on the stream that brings from the fount at the heart of time love of one for another. We have played alongside millions of lovers, shared in the same shy sweetness of meeting, the same distressful tears of farewell. Old love, but in shapes that renew and renew forever.